we are supposed to get any from them. I think they kept all them for themselves.
Well, they said they don't need it.
They don't need it. We need them dramatically.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, we have to start because we have to be punctual because we have important speakers who all have to leave in time right after Divan. Thanks for all of you for coming and thanks a lot for our guests for today. Anton Bendarzsevszkij from Oeconomus Institute, Mezentseva from the Verkhovna Rada, Viola von Cramon from the European Parliament, and Márton Tompos from the Hungarian Parliament. I will introduce them a bit more detailed. After my initial few words, you will hear an analytic introduction, analytic framework from Anton. The discussion of today will be around the future of Europe, Europe-Ukraine relations and the future of Ukraine. So quite broad topics that we can discuss from many perspectives. And we hope that by the end of the discussion, we will have a bit of a clearer understanding of what might be possible end of the conflict in Ukraine and what are the possibilities for peace that even seems a bit of distant now, and what are the possible steps for European and possibly Hungarian decision makers to make things move forward in the right direction. So without further ado, I'm Péter, Krekó, Director of Political Capital Institute, and also I would like to thank for all of you for coming and also for my colleagues Katalin Szitás and Hanna Faludi to put together the event today, and for CEU for hosting us. So without further ado, I would like to pass over the floor to Anton to give his opening remarks and keynote speech. Let me briefly introduce Anton. I think everyone who watches TV in Hungary knows him pretty well because he's one of the, let's say, two most prominent experts talking about Ukraine issues today in Hungarian public, but also he gives some international commentary as well. So Anton is an expert of foreign affairs and security policy. He specializes in the international and foreign policy of post-Soviet countries, focusing on Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, energy security and security politics. From November 2020, he was heading the geopolitical research group of Danube Institute, and he is currently leading Oeconomus Economic Research Institute as one of its directors responsible for content, strategy, and research. So, Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm very happy to be here. Welcome, everybody. Well, it won't be a keynote speech, just a few remarks in short. Well, Peter asked me to talk about how is it possible to come to peace in Ukraine. Well, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. It's quite a hard question, and a question which will be valid for the next years ahead. I don't think it will be resolved in a short period of time. However, I would like to start with introducing the different concept of peace, or let's say different narratives of peace, which we can see from different global players, different global actors. Well, first of all, of course, there is a Ukrainian perspective on peace, which tells that peace should be based on internationally recognized borders of Ukraine from 1991. So including, of course, the Donbas region and Crimea. Moreover, Ukrainian leaders also stated that the complete victory would also require transformation of Russian political system, because if that will not happen, then a long-lasting peace is not possible in Ukraine. Also, Dmytro Kuleba, Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs at Munich Security Forum, told that if Russia do not changes, war will continue in one or another form. So basically, we can say that these are the main points of Ukrainian peace narrative. Then, of course, there is a narrative of Russian peace. The narrative of Russian peace is more of an ultimatum to Ukraine. And that ultimatum was made concrete after September last year when Russia annexed 4 Ukrainian territories. And after that, the main Russian narrative builds upon immediate stop of the war from Ukrainian side and recognition of not only Crimea and Donbass, but also Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. So this is some kind of a narrative of power, narrative of a winning side. At least that's what Russia wants to project from its side. Then we have a narrative of United States, which is based on international world order, the world order which was created after the Second World War. And United States wants to go back to this kind of international security system, to the basically the system which is based on international law and sovereignty of the states, which were created back in 1991, but also, back after Second World War, but also United States in some leaders' speeches told about strategic defeat of Russia. Which also became popular in the Western narratives, that strategic defeat of Russia. Also, there is Chinese narrative, a peace plan which was proposed by China. Up until February this year, China was quite silent about the situation in Ukraine and what does it think about the situation in Ukraine. And in the end of February, China came up with a peace plan. 12 points of a peace plan, in which it stated, well, I just highlight the most important parts. It's that we should stick to international law, and that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine should be kept. So based on this, I think the narrative of China kind of correlates to the narrative of United States and Ukraine. However, China also adds that the peace plan, the peace between Russia and Ukraine, should also take into account some of Russia's security concerns. So this is also part of Chinese narratives, beside the fact that territorial integrity should be kept, meaning that Russia should take back the troops from the internationally recognized border of Ukraine. But it also would like to address some security concerns of Russia, like the expanding of the NATO, the neutral status of Ukraine, and so on. Then, and lastly, there is and also another perspective of peace based on countries in Central Europe and Balkan, some other countries, which say that immediate peace is needed because Ukraine is facing a stronger foe, Russia. Peace restoration of the previous status of Ukraine, the territorial integrity, should be a long-lasting process. But first of all, a peace should be done, so to stop all the bloodshed and basically the casualties, which of course we can bring back. So these are the main narratives, and it's quite hard to think what will be the future of the conflict if so many different perspectives on the future of this region is perceived or created. I think that basically all of these concepts have their flaws and problems. For example, if we take into account the strategic defeat of Russia, then we go back to the situation of the end of Cold War, and I think many of nowadays problems are based on that situation when Russia was perceived as some kind of a loser or a defeated party. The Soviet Union, well, an empire collapsed, and the current Russian leadership sees the current situation as returning back to the situation before the collapse of the Soviet Union, restoring some kind of historical historical problems. And if we are forcing a strategic defeat on Russia, I'm not sure that this kind of perception, this kind of period won't come back. If we see Russia's history, it's kind of a cyclical path of strengthening, conquest, and then collapse, right? In the 90s, we've seen a collapse of the Russian Empire, of the Soviet Empire. In the 2000s, we've seen a strengthening of Russia. And now we see a conquest, expanding of Russia, but inevitably we will see a collapse of Russia. Question is when and how they will return to this cyclic historical path. However, so strategic defeat, I'm not sure it's the best option to see in the future. However, if we take like two poles, a bad peace is also not the best option for it. Bad peace is actually worse than a peace at all, because it means that Russia wins some time to prepare and to attack again and to fulfill its goals in Ukraine. So it's quite important to keep in mind all these ideas that bad peace and strategic defeat is quite it's a two different poles of the narrative, and it's maybe not the best solution of the conflict. Well, I think Ukraine has a long path for freedom ahead, unfortunately, and it's also a question of time. Russia thinks that time is working for Russia. I think Vladimir Putin personally thinks that the West is weak. The West won't support Ukraine for long. That's why, if just some time pass, Ukraine will remain alone in this war. So time works for Russia. That's what Kremlin thinks. Ukraine thinks that the time is working for Ukraine, obviously, because they are receiving more and more support from the West, because Russia is running out of ammunition, running out of people, and so on. And actually, I think I do think time works for Ukraine. In this case, we can consider or compare the time last year in March, how Ukraine was prepared for the war, and we compare it to the situation now with all the Western support, financial support, the weapons which Ukraine received, the training of Ukrainian soldiers. We can see that Ukraine is already stronger, at least in military, than it was one year ago. And I think time really works for Ukraine. Also, another idea that, well, for Russia, the Afghanistan war, Soviet Union, took 10 years to reconsider and to pull out from Afghanistan. But some comparisons that when Russia started, or Soviet Union started the war in Afghanistan, the current leader of Soviet Union, Brezhnev, was 72 years old. When Russia started the war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin was 69 years old. So there is just 3 years difference. But why I'm telling that the Russian leadership right now is getting older and older. It's in their late 60s, like Sergei Shoigu or Valery Gerasimov, or in their 70s, like Putin or Patrushev. So I think how the war could end for Ukraine for a longer perspective, and how it could end, is that the current Russian leadership will be gone at one time of, well, they don't have years or tens of years ahead, right? And the next leadership which will come in Russia, I don't know what will be that leadership, but definitely it will be a younger leadership. There will be a generational gap between it, like in case of Brezhnev and Soviet leaders coming after Brezhnev, and then Gorbachev, who was like 30 years younger than the previous leaders. So I think this will be the main point of the resolution, and I'm afraid that Ukraine has a long fight ahead for their freedom, but the time works for Ukraine in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anton. And I will definitely pick up on some of the points you raised. But first, let me introduce the members of the panel. We will have a short roundtable discussion with the three distinguished politicians we have in the panel, and then there will be a short time for questions and answers. So to my left, we have Mezentseva from the Verkhovna Rada, and she's a member of the Ukrainian parliament, and she was elected to the Verkhovna Rada in 2019. She held several positions related to European integration, including she's the deputy chairperson of the Committee on Ukraine's Integration into the European Union since 2020, and also she is a chairperson of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe since 2021. So everything that is related to the European affairs of Ukraine is in Maria's hands, practically. Then we have Viola von Cramon, who is a member of the European Parliament, and both of our foreign speakers made a quite rocky road here to Budapest. So let me thank to both of you that you made this tricky trip. Viola is coming from Berlin, that is right now paralyzed by strikes, which made her trip here definitely difficult. So thanks a lot for making it. And she was elected as a member of the European Parliament in 2019, and she's at the Greens group. Since her election, she has been serving on the Committee of Foreign Affairs and as a substitute in the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy and on Budget Control. Since July 2020, she's also a member of the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation, and she was one of the most hawkish members of the European Parliament even before it was cool, which I think is important to mention, way before the invasion. Last but not least, we have Márton Tompos from the Hungarian General Assembly. He's a member of the Hungarian Parliament. He's a media communication and international relations specialist and a founding member, spokesman and deputy group leader of the Momentum movement. Also, Márton is one of the most vocal voices when it comes to issues around Ukraine. He also visited Ukraine and met with a lot of politicians there, and also he was one of the co-organizers of a recent pro-Ukrainian rally in Budapest, which I think turned out rather nice with a good participation. So my first question would go to you, Maria. So we had from Anton a nice overview of the many quite mutually exclusive understandings of peace. What do you think could be a realistic peace plan? In Hungary, we hear quite a lot of references to the immediate need for peace, which might be a bit of, too long of a call. But to make my question a bit more specific, do you think that peace between Ukraine and Russia is manageable under the presidency of Vladimir Putin?
Yes, I'll try to do my best. First of all, greetings, dear participants, dear excellencies. It's such a great pleasure to see such high interest still in Ukraine after 1 year of full-scale invasion and after a general 9 years of this brutal war of aggression of Russia against us in international terms. I would paraphrase a little bit. I think the victory and then the peace is possible under President Zelensky's chairmanship, not under President Vladimir Putin chairmanship, which I believe can have a destiny sort of Mr. Milosevic, who was actually sent to the trials by his own government after the ICC warrant. So history sometimes repeats itself. We do understand that the leader of Russia doesn't travel much, and many experts, international experts, have raised concerns about the not only the legitimacy but the practical implications of the ICC warrant with regards to massive deportations of children, which is an international law, a war crime and a crime with a genocidal nature. I'm expecting as an international lawyer more warrants coming from the ICC, like one which is also contributes to genocidal nature crimes as of massive targeting of critical and civilian infrastructure. That's my small predictions. Meanwhile, under the approach into peace, being in the capital of Hungary, Budapest, I would like to remind all of us that we had some repercussions to peace settlement and the future of peace under Budapest Memorandum from 1994, when 4 great countries, US, UK, Ukraine, Russia, have signed this memorandum. The word memorandum is never a good one of a choice for an international documents dealing with defense and security. However, we now look at some feedbacks of even the future. What can the future be for this document as of today? And I think the peace plan that was created by the President's office, his team, and it consists of 10 points, and we welcome every partner country in the world to be determined to either food security or energy security or climate change issues or military security. And I think President of Hungary has very clearly stated that there are at least 2 points of the 10 points peace plan of President Zelensky that Hungary can commit to. We have been agreeing on many things in humanitarian aid and other things. I doubt that would be security issues, though. However, accountability is very welcomed for Hungary to join, because we have created, and you know it well, the core group which works to respond to the long-lasting crime of aggression, which is a call to create and set up a special tribunal. European Parliament supported it in their resolutions. Council of Europe made 6 documents on it. NATO Parliamentary Assembly made 2. OSCE made 1. Everywhere in those documents, Hungarian politicians supported us, and I think simultaneously to the approximation of the victory and the peace afterwards, we have to take care of the accountability, because it does have to send a strong signal to the possible aggressors across the globe that their crime will be taken to the court, whichever that means. So for us, we tried 3 times, friends. We really tried. We tried for 9 years in the format of mediation in the Minsk format under Germany and France leadership. We tried in March. Believe me, I was looking at that screen, at that footages from Minsk meetings when the leaders of my political party were there risking their lives. Every time we thought they will not come back. As simple as that, because that was a very high risk for them to travel, first of all. And imagine them sitting with the former Minister of Culture, a guy, Mr. Tolstoy, a member of Parliament of Russia, who used to be with us in the Council of Europe, making absolute nonsense of every possible initiative of a possible dialogue for peace, etc. So there were no decision makers at that table. We were not expecting much, even though we tried. After what the world has witnessed from Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, my home region, Kharkiv, the mass graves in Izum, there was it. There was a total final stop of any possible attempts for the so-called peace talks. That's why we will follow President Zelensky initiative. We're very happy that China is recalling some points, but I'd like, I know I'm too long in answering already. Stop me, please. One very important thing. There cannot be a cease of fire and then a withdrawal. That is absolutely illogical. That will lead us to yet another frozen conflict at our subcontinent. Only withdrawal and then a ceasefire. You might think it's a little bit odd, but this is how it should be. And Chinese are doing it reversal, for instance, in their peace plan, even though we're so happy that this 12 points of presidency and the recent, I'm very happy about the recent visit of President of China to Moscow. It ended up with nothing for Moscow, but we do see that it was an attempt for Russia to try to get the technologies working for them, and there were many jokes that you know, in the news, hot news, China is helping in a military way for Russia. They are sending 100,000 memory cards, stick memory cards. You know, it's nothing. It's just a joke for sure. Last but not least, there can't be any peace guarantees without the coming back, and I highly appreciate that Anton mentioned it, to our strategy number 1, 1991 borders, and I think all of us do respect the territorial integrity and independence, and this is an existential question. So regardless how long this war will last, we are committed to fight until the very end.
Thank you. Viola, I would turn to you. My first question would be that in Germany we could see that there was a quite considerable shift in public opinion and also in political norms when it comes to supporting a country in a war with weapons, heavy artillery, even tanks and so on. There has been a lot of debates around that and still is, but it seems that the German society went a long way. So how do you see the perception of war and peace in Germany and a bit beyond? And to highlight another aspect of the question, there has been a lot of discussions, especially before the invasion, on how Europe should be more independent from the United States when it comes to defense, and Germany has some bad experiences with the withdrawal of troops of the United States under the Trump presidency, but it seems to have changed again since the beginning of the invasion, and the recent poll of ECFR have showed that even in Germany and in most countries in the European Union, the partnership with the United States seems to be something of perceived to be a necessity and a much more valuable asset than before. So, what's your experience versus a German politician on these understandings, different understandings of peace?
Thank you very much, Peter, for having me, and thanks a lot for being part of this great panel discussion. I think it is very timely to be here in Budapest, as you have mentioned the Budapest Memorandum, and speaking about peace, speaking about some individual member states, maybe also my own, Germany. Many things have significant change since last year even, and that is one of the, I think, main mistakes we have done. The war has not started at the 24th of February 2022, but in February 14, and it was overlooked because we were so happy with the so-called Minsk agreement that we achieved something, and that we had a platform or format where we could mediate. But if you had spoken to negotiators in this format, you could easily see that Russia breached all the agreements, never had any interest to achieve a sustainable peace here. And that's where I'm fully in line with what Maria had said and what Anton has said before. I mean, a sustainable peace must look completely different from what we have seen in 2014, 15, and so on. So coming back to your question, how does it look like in Germany? Indeed, I was one of those going together with Robert Habeck to Ukraine in 21 and coming back, of course, with the request and with the demand of the Ukrainians, actually, how can we be the ones not giving the necessary armory, equipment, weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves against the Russians? And we were heavily criticized, and it was a huge outcry from all political parties, not just from our own. So at that point in 21, in May, nobody was ready for this debate and really tried to blame us as the warmonger and not the ones who are standing in solidarity with those who defend their own country, their territory. But that has changed in a way which is, I think, obvious, because Russia made it so clear. There's no there's no shades of gray. That is just black and white, with all the war crimes Maria has described, and I've been in Bucha twice, Irpin twice, and some of the other places during the war, and I'm going to go again also to Kharkiv and those places, and it is important to do so, because then you realize you can't just make peace in a way on a paper and withdraw the troops. You really have to go for a special tribune. You really have to make sure that security guarantees are given to Ukraine, that we have a certain responsibility for the future of Ukraine, be it on the military side, but be it also on the EU integration side. Is that the majority of the people in Germany, in the EU? I would say at the moment, yes, it is. I think there is still a large majority for supporting Ukraine to make sure that they can liberate their territory, and they can, at the end, sit at the negotiation table in a very strong position. But I would really, link it to the situation, transatlantic situation or transatlantic relation, and I'm very much concerned in case somebody from the Trump camp or somebody from the more isolationist camp might win the next presidential elections. And you see already the first preparations being done in the study from Rand Corporation and from other right-wing conservative think tanks, but also from the more leftist think tanks, that they might diminish their support for Ukraine. What would this mean for us in Europe? We would need to increase, and we would also need to, not just to increase the financial support and the technical support, but also to increase our, let's say, lobbying power or lobbying activities around the world to get the Global South on board. You have probably seen that some of our leaders, Annalena Baerbock, but also Scholz himself, traveled around Latin America, India, and so on to make sure that they are not, let's say, left to the Russians, but they're really either undecided or they join our camp or at least support our activities and make sure that Russia becomes more and more isolated. That is extremely difficult. But when the US will decide to diminish their support, military, financially, technically, then I think it is up to us in the European Union to do even more. And this, I guess, will be extremely difficult to sell, to make people understand why this is our responsibility, why this is not just Ukrainian or Russian conflict, but in a way it is our future. If Russia is not completely defeated, there is a danger, as Anton has said, that they only regroup, that they will increase their capabilities, and in the end they will not just go on the territory, or they will not just invade the territory of Ukraine, but also will do so, and they started already destabilizing Moldova. They will reach out even more to the Georgian government, and what they do with the hybrid attacks in many of our member states very effectively. They will destabilize our societies as well in an extent where then it will be extremely difficult to gather the support to gather the support for Ukraine. So I think at the moment we are at a good, I would say, balance of, yes, there are a lot of critical voices also, especially in the east of Germany, where sometimes you would rather maybe call it as a Stockholm syndrome. It's hard to understand why especially those parts of Germany who lived under the occupation of the Soviet Empire for so long still have this romantic approach towards this Russian aggression. But nevertheless, I would say that the vast majority, especially the younger generation, especially the better educated people, fully understand what is on stake, why we have to invest, and why we have to overcome these old principles of not selling weapons into current wars. And that is a big, I would say, success, at least for the German society.
Thanks a lot. I think we will also come back a bit to this question of transatlantic relationship. It's important. Márton, my next question would go to you. Hungary does not seem to be the easiest place to, how to say, advocate for strong solidarity towards Ukraine. Still, you have been part of many initiatives that targeted this and achieved some success in that respect. So, and also, if we take a look at, for example, the polls in Hungary, we can see that despite the fact that in Hungary, for example, support for sending weapons to Ukraine is on a lower level, still we have some support, about 30% of the society towards sanctions, and still there is a overarching support through party lines about inviting and welcoming refugees, Ukrainian refugees to Hungary. So what are there are many fears over that Ukraine fatigue can kill all the solidarity towards Ukraine in the last year. What are your experiences as a politician of overcoming this issue? I think we should not be afraid of that much, that this issue will disappear from the agenda, political agenda, but what are your experiences about raising empathy and also, let's say, for example, collecting money to buy generators to Ukraine and so on?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor being here, and I'm glad that I can see Maria again, and it's a pleasure meeting you as well. It's really, I'm humbled to be here. I was very surprised by your request, but let's talk about Ukraine and Hungary then. Well, just a bit of background. We've been to Ukraine twice with our Momentum delegation, once in November, once in January. And on our first visit, we had plenty of meetings, and one of it was with an NGO. They made some researches about public opinion in Ukraine in terms of how Ukrainian people perceive the neighbors, Romanians, Bulgarians, Hungarians, Poles, and so on. And the first date was January. At that point, 15% of Ukrainian population thought that Hungary is a non-friendly country, let's put it this way. In November, when we were there, it rose to 67%. And now in March, we are in late March, so imagine the numbers now. Because they didn't improve, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it's vice versa. We see that, yes, creating empathy towards Ukrainians within the Hungarian society is not easy, but it's the other way around as well. The two nations becoming hostile more and more. However, what we saw is our key message during our trips was Orban does not equal Hungary. I'm an opposition member, of course. That's my key message. And it worked. In November, when we were there, they said, yeah, thank you for coming. It's very nice. Please come back with generators next time. So we came back with generators next time. And on our way to Kiev, we stopped at Rivne, I think it was Rivne, and it was amazing. We had a journalist with us who had the guts to go out at 10 p.m. to have a beer with the locals, and he found a group of young people to have a few words. And when they asked him that, okay, where are you from? From Hungary. Oh, then a 10-minute rant came up about Hungary and Orban and the system. But at the end, they said that, yeah, but we know, but those young Hungarian guys who came here, yeah, that's fine. So I understand both perspectives. I understand why the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their lives, fighting for their freedom, for their nation, their existence, are not taking so kindly those who just clearly sucking up to the aggressor. My apologies for the words. I also understand why a nation, talking about Hungary, which has been lied to, screwed over, and humiliated over and over and over again over the last 3 decades since the transition, is really open to ideas that no, you shouldn't be humane, you shouldn't have solidarity, is their fault, they attacked, and all the other Russian propaganda that we hear day by day. So it's not easy, but if you remember 2015, the migration crisis here in Budapest as well, in the first few weeks, there was insane support. Back then, I used to work for a communications agency, and there we collected food and clothes, and I think it was a quite clear picture that Hungarian society, or at least the people of Budapest, stood behind these people and tried to help. Even one of the telecommunications giants was there, and they erected poles to help local telecommunication problems. The same thing happened after 2022, February 24th. The first wave of refugees came to Hungary, and I think I'm not exaggerating if I'm saying that thousands, or if not tens of thousands of Hungarians helped. So solidarity and the understanding of we have to help each other is there. The problem is, can you fight it if you go against the Hungarian propaganda and the government apparatus? I think we can talk a lot about Transcarpathia and why the Hungarian government does that. But I want to leave it here because I think this is the key message, that the solidarity, the seed of solidarity is there. You just have to let it blossom, let it grow.
Thanks a lot. Maria, if I can ask it from you, what are your experiences with Hungarian decision makers in the international bodies? You are quite prominent member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. You meet with Hungarian colleagues there, and in the rhetoric, what Márton have referred to is obviously there, and especially in the Hungarian media space, it's prevalent. Also, it has an impact internationally, but in most of the votes in the Council of Europe, also in the European Council, for example, Hungary sometimes reluctantly, but following the Euro-Atlantic mainstream mostly. So what are your experiences, if you can talk a bit about that?
Yes, I'm going to be on a very positive side, maybe very unlikely to hear that, but indeed in the Council of Europe, as we are now 46. Before the exclusion of Russia, we were 47. And I was online at that meeting at the very end of, at the very beginning of March, when the initiative was coming from parliamentarians, but it was sort of a pass given to the ministerial level of the 47 member states, and everyone except Russia voted in favor to exclude Russian Federation for the fact of aggression, for the fact of violating the core principles of the Council of Europe, which is an organization, one of the most prominent, fighting for 75 years for the human rights. But we went way beyond the understanding of a human rights dimension. So we were the first organization to exclude Russia, together with the support of Hungarian delegation, both the representatives of the ruling party and opposition, and the chairman of the delegation is also the chair of the political committee, and he was so much on the Ukrainian side when we passed in amendments, etc. So we were together the first ones to call Russia a terrorist regime. It was mirrored in European Parliament decisions later. We called, imagine, in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly dealing with human rights, to increase air defense support systems, unprecedented. We called also on many things that are not touching directly the human rights. But today we understand that the humanitarian aid is sometimes equal the military aid. And that's why, even though we understand Hungary is not giving its territory to transmit weapons, neither they supported in recent decisions the mutual trainings within NATO mechanisms. That brings some disappointing things, but we do understand that, for instance, in the file, and that's what I expect, at least, in the April file, when we're going to be, again, the first organization to pass a resolution on mass deportation of children, and we will try to call it what it is, which is a genocide. I'm sure that Hungarian delegation will support us in this endeavors. Interestingly to say, we have one issue which can be a stuck point, and this is, yes, Viola, the case of the national minority rights. Indeed, under the initiative of Hungarian representatives in the European Council, which you've mentioned, it was added among the 7 top priorities for us to fulfill, which was given by the European Commission back in June last year, when we were granted the status of a candidate country. Yes, indeed, it was a very long-lasting process of amending a law on education, a law on national minorities' rights, which we passed on the 13th December last year. The message, and I'll try to make it very short, which we want to pass, is that we never had an intention as a state having more than 120 nationalities living, used to be living in peace if Russia wouldn't invade us one day. We never tried to make a super, let's say, super difference between each and everyone. Yes, indeed, the state language is Ukrainian, and we have a separate law on that. Indeed, we grant a right to study in Hungarian in the private schools. Yes, we can revise it to make it more to public schools as well. However, during the time when Ukraine cost to ourselves in terms of taxpayers' money from $5 to $7 billion per month to maintain our existence, to pay the salaries, social guarantees, the salaries to our military, doctors, teachers, etc., and the Hungarian government would see us also paying and funding these public schools in Hungarian, we would need to seek financial assistance. And that means we need to bring all these technical matters back to the working group which existed before the invasion at the ministerial level, involving indeed many Romanian and Hungarian NGO and minority groups. We have 153,000 of Hungarian minority living mainly in the Zakarpattia region. 95% of them live there. So we never had an intention, you know, to disregard the right of minorities. In the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, in the committee which I have a privilege to chair right now, it's on non-discrimination and equality. There is a colleague from Serbia with Hungarian background, which will be a leader of this file, a rapporteur for the status of national minorities in Ukraine. Interestingly to say, the file was initiated back in the days by Russian delegation, and it was called the breach of rights of minorities in Ukraine. So that is very interesting, how still, being not there in the Council of Europe, Russian Federation will try to use our minor issues in this sense, which are really can be tackled in the working group, and our government is dedicated to it, the parliament as well. Yes, indeed, the law which we have passed could have been better written, and it's not perfect. We are waiting for the revision of the Venice Commission, and we will rely on it. It will come out in June this year. However, in May, I think we will have a feedback from European Commission already on the 7 key points for the membership. So this is not a milestone of our relationship, and we don't want to hear like it sounds super politicized. We want to narrow it down to the very local level, to talk with the communities and to see how it can be tackled in a better way, so both sides are respected mutually in a reciprocal way. Because when I spoke to Mr. Szijjártó, he didn't know that we have almost 90 schools teaching in Hungarian. And you can say, and you may wonder how many Hungarian schools teach in Ukrainian. Please believe me, there are way less than this figure. So with a no blaming approach, we would want to make it structured in a way that by June we know where we're going with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to make it a Hungary-specific discussion, but Márton, can I just ask you briefly about your position or Momentum's position on this, on this crucial point of bilateral relations, the minority language rights in Ukraine?
Crucial, absolutely. I mean, it's very important that you treat your minorities properly, regarding to which country we're talking about, not during a war. I mean, we are talking about an issue of survival, not about if you can speak the language or not. Two different, not on the same level. So, if I look on the issue at hand, I see that you could talk about this much easier if you make gestures and just talk about it behind closed doors, and you can find a solution provided that you want to. My fear is that the government doesn't want to find a solution, actually. They want to find an issue that they can create support with towards their own policies. And seeing how the members of the Foreign Affairs Committee talk about it, repeating the propaganda phrases that, yes, we want peace, we accept the integrity, but, and there is the Hungarian minority issue, it seems clear to me that they, one, know nothing about the whole thing. Two, it's the same with the Russian propaganda. They have like a core of truth, but around it they build something either not true or just fabricated or something that is a bit more spiced up. So my point is that, yes, you could talk about it. It's important in the background. So just let the Ukrainians at the table. Don't veto on the, let's say, the Ukrainian ambassador sitting with the NATO ambassadors. No point. But looking at what they did in last year, I don't think that they want a solution. They want tension. They want a conflict because that's how they thrive.
Viola, I would, my question to you would be, if you have comments on that issue, it's welcome as well. But to broaden the scope a bit and zoom out from the bilateral relations in general, you talked a bit about the hybrid threats, and you have, you undersigned and even initiated many calls for pushing back in Europe the influence of Russia and disinformation, hybrid threats, and so on. How much power Russia still has to influence European public opinions, European policies, given that they seem to be pretty busy in losing the war in Ukraine at the moment. So the optimistic reading of the situation right now is that Russia has less capacity and less resources to influence policies in Europe, including in Germany and elsewhere. How much do you subscribe to this optimistic reading?
Well, I think the example of the minorities in Uzhhorod and in the Ukrainian Carpathian is a good example for one little tool, one little instrument of a hybrid war. And that doesn't cost a lot. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it is homegrown information, but of course that is the narrative which was placed there with the help and with the support coming from the Kremlin, because they know exactly what effect this will have. This will create division here in the society. This will give Orban a leverage to veto things which are absolutely unnecessary, and so on and so forth. And we have a couple of other, I would say, examples where it is not very costly to do the same in our immediate neighborhood. For example, Western Balkans, Bosnia, Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik. You don't need a lot of money to instrumentalize him against us, against his own country, against a peace and stability in the Western Balkan. And things like that will be used, I think, even more so when Putin sees that he might lose the war militarily in Ukraine. And if we do not wake up before, if we do not, for example, manage to mediate here and find a proper way how we're going to make sure that this minority rights is accepted by the Hungarian government and so on, not to create this tension, and in Bosnia to increase the EUFOR mandate, for example, to make sure that there will be not a second front and maybe not another wall amongst the former Yugoslav states, we might be too late. So on one hand, we need to make sure we counterbalance, we debunk this disinfo politics coming from Russia, and this is extremely effective because they know our weaknesses. For example, when the Maidan took place, it was very easy for Russia to spread this disinformation on fascists, on Nazis, and so on. And that worked for quite some time very well. We have, with the Russian influence, especially Gazprom influence, energy influence, in Germany, we have almost a role model of a capturing state when it comes to energy. And now I have the book about the Moscow connection in Lower Saxony. This is my home constituency, where you see that Schröder, Gabriel, and many other of the SPD former politicians were so close and were so much used as an instrument that it was, how to say, also there, it was very cheap and it was very pragmatic from the Russian side to use them to increase our energy dependency and to increase our risk aversity towards Russia. But that was not, I mean, we as the Greens were the only ones warning because of that. So Russia does that to certain member states. I think Austria is also a good example where we see that NATO doesn't trust any intelligence, sharing intelligence with the Austrian secret services. If there are any reliable, I don't know. But for example, here there is a clear, very strong influence from the Russian side. We saw during the Corona crisis, for example, or the COVID crisis, what kind of disinformation politics was so effective against vaccination from Western companies and so on, and how Russia very, very successfully created a Twitter account and many others for their own vaccination, where the efficacy was extremely low. Nobody wanted to be vaccinated with it, but nevertheless, their PR was very blunt and almost hard to overlook. And that, I think, they will continue in the future. They will go on with this. They will make sure we saw at the last G20 summit when Lavrov started to tell the world that they were attacked by the West and so on. So this kind of disinformation politics, we have to debunk as much as we can. We have to do this in our member states to explain to the people what happened, but we also have to make sure that we have special and regional competences in those countries where Russian influence is remarkable strong, like Latin America, like Sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia. For example, Ukraine has only one embassy in the African continent. So with that, I think we have to be, how to say, more vigilant, and we have to support, and we need a more, let's say, broader strategy, not just on military support, but especially on strategic communication, how to proceed with that. As I said, the Western Balkan is an immediate danger because there are so many proxies from the Russian side, but also within, with your lovely Prime Minister here, and for example with some others. Sorry, my voice is a bit bad. Like the Serbian president and some of the let's say multiplicators in this region. But in general, I would say we have set up a special committee where I'm a member. In the committee, we have tried to create a better coordination from the EU level with the member states, but some member states, also yours, are very reluctant to take things on board, to be coordinated from the EU level. But also I know that Germany is not very keen to be part of that team. So to overcome this reluctance, we need to have more competences on the EU level to fight for this, to make sure that the Stratcom unit, which is extended now to 42 people, can also disseminate their analysis back to the member states. We need to make sure this is understood by the Council and by the Commission. And at the moment, we are still at the very beginning when it comes to how do we get the information which was gathered and analyzed in Brussels back to the administration in all the member states, and then drawing conclusion and also having, let's say, a warning system in our member states. That's, I would say, we are still very weak. Resilience.
Thank you. Maria, let me touch upon an issue that we have not discussed yet. What is the impact of the war on everyday life in Ukraine? I think beyond Ukraine you can read a lot about the war fronts, for good reasons, of the heroism of the Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian society in standing up against the aggressor. But of course, it's not easy to run a well-functioning economy during a war. It can long last, as we could also hear from Anton and also from you and others, and everyday difficulties in living, in finding jobs, and so on, could be possibly dangerous, according to some observers, even for Ukrainians in terms of how much they are supporting the war. So what is the everyday perception of Ukrainians when it comes to living difficulties? And a connected question, when do you think the next election could take place in Ukraine, which is like, of course, dependent partially on how the war evolves, because under a martial law, I think it's not even possible to have elections, but originally it would be scheduled by the parliamentary by 2024, and also the presidential. So what do you think might be the realistic date for a new election?
Yeah, so that's a more brief answer. Don't expect any early parliamentary elections this year. That's confirmed information from our leadership. First of all, it's not scheduled. So there were many rumors like Ukrainian parliament would go on early elections and it will be not including the temporary occupied territories. We're not doing that for sure. Also, we can't amend the constitution during the martial law, which we extend as a parliament from day one. And surely we expect that we will regain the territories. Please understand, generally the elections were held in the premises, like for instance schools. I want to inform you that there are hundreds and thousands of schools being bombed, and they are not. They are in the condition that can't be reconstructed. We need to build new ones. So even the facilities to conduct normal process of elections is not there. Regaining the territories is point number one, and something we haven't discussed today is the mining. It's 300,000 square kilometers which are mined in Ukraine every day. Like for instance, just yesterday, 4 people died in Kharkiv region because of stepping on mines, and these are children, elderly people, those who are just driving, stopping on the edge of the road, and sorry, they are using natural toilet on the way, and that poses a huge threat for us, where we can't guarantee peace and security for people, and that's extra point where we call our partners to facilitate this process, not to make it 10 years ahead for the demining. So such small technical things which we're not thinking immediately when we think about the voting. So I call on every colleague of mine not to start this political process yet until we gain this victory together. So not to politicize their activities, but rather working on approximation of the Victory Day together. Your first question, as I told you before, and I am trying to explain it to everyone, in Ukrainian we say cheers as budmo. It is a Latin version of carpe diem, live the moment. Every day for us is a gift, because tomorrow, there might not be tomorrow. So before I'm going to come back to my balcony in Kharkiv, watching the Russian rockets from my balcony, having a coffee sometimes, and you can easily see it because my apartment is only 38 kilometers from the Russian border, and that's the point where they launched this rocket, so it's visible. I want to, for you to understand that it is not just a figure for Ukrainians of how much of economy we've lost. It's around 50%. Or how much does it cost per day to have the country running? Or how many jobs were lost and how in a technical way we're trying to regain them in IT sector, for instance. It is about how much does it cost for you, dear friends? And it's been calculated by the UN. It's not me, Maria Mezentseva, or Ukrainian government. It's the UN who calculated that it's 1.7 billion people in 94 countries of the globe who were directly affected by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Whether that would be your energy bill or the increase of the prices for food or the lack of grain in Africa, when Ethiopia, for instance, was not accepting our ships, and then they did, but it did take a while to negotiate, and it did take a while even to go to get this grain deal going with many partners, including Hungary, by the way. So this is about the price we pay daily, but can we calculate how much more it would cost if we would, for instance, have got the Leopard 2 or some other kits, or even F-16 as of today, which is my dream, and I'm receiving these text messages from our amazing pilots who can operate them, who can do it already with no extra trainings, for instance. This is about the cost that can't be calculated immediately, and that's why for us, the life has been divided into prior 24th of February and what we're having today. It's a long-lasting 24th of February, and sometimes you think that you are not capable any longer to operate, because tomorrow you have tomorrow you are attending a funeral of a friend. Then the day after you're voting in the parliament, the day after you're touring, it's going to be Indonesia, Jakarta, The Hague, where you're expecting the new group on a crime of aggression to be operating from June. And then you're discussing the special tribunal and the seize of assets in London in the House of Commons. Then you go to US to talk to them about the bipartisan support and the right wing of the Republicans who are saying that, oh gosh, it costs so much for our taxpayers daily, but it has been calculated, it's in cents, actually, in the taxpayers' money, but it will cost for us much more if we will have this burden of the, you know, disregarding Ukraine, because this is not our war. This is the existential war for our whole subcontinent and our history. We are not coming back, or sorry, we are not marching towards Europe as it might be seen in terms of European project. The European project is now threatened by the very core existence of its idea. It was a project for peace. Now it is becoming a project where we are fighting yet another, and maybe already for someone, a third world war, with a crazy guy talking every daily basis that he might use the tactical nuclear weapons, which we of course don't accept as a real threat or something realistic he would use. But geographically, they will never leave us. They are bordering us. We can't just go to Pacific Ocean tomorrow as a country. That is unrealistic. That's why building resilience, and here I go with every comment that my colleagues have made. This is about of daily job being done regardless and whatever it takes for us. And indeed, please understand, we highly thankful for everything each of you in this room is doing, either at a political, analytical sense, or even spreading the information. But it will never be enough until we see the perspective of the real negotiations for peace. But that will be only when we can see the victory day. And the last but not least, this is so. You know, one day you think it is so unfair that you have to go through this. But when you remember the books you've been reading on international law and you see how we can amend it, how we can change it, and how we can help the old instruments like the Geneva Conventions or something else to be actually functioning and to be reporting to new threats, like, for instance, this GPT chat, which writes a law in 10 seconds, or I think, yes, we will be fighting robots in the future, but let's stop fighting each other in the first place. And our planet will not be able to maintain us if we will not think again about the possible climate refugees and the threats we are posing to our planet ourselves. So the answer, to make it very short, only solidarity, and this is the seed of solidarity, which was already referred to, can save us. Otherwise, I think the shield, if and we don't believe it, but if Ukrainian shield will fall one day, we will see Russian troops at the far edges of the western coasts of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Viola, it's a very broad issue. I would like to ask for other brief response, but what do you think are who could be the most important players of rebuilding Ukraine? Because there are already a lot of discussion about that, and of course the precondition of rebuilding Ukraine would be to stop the war and to have some kind of peace, but already there seems to be quite a lot of thinking ahead about that. Who do you think could be the most important players there, and do you envision some, let's say, threats or pitfalls when we are thinking in these optimistic terms?
Well, first of all, I think the restructuring and the way how we together will rebuild Ukraine could be also a role model in terms of sustainable building, in terms of recycling, when we really look at a very technical way of how this can be managed. So this could be an innovative project, this could be a participatory project, but then we have to make sure we have the right political framework in place. For that, I do understand why the Ukrainian people are so keen to start the negotiation talks as soon as possible, so that when the money will flow, and not just 1 or 2 billion, but rather quite a lot of money, we have a proper oversight, we have monitoring, we have control committees in place. And for this, the European Union and some member states have invested a lot in the decentralization process from 2014 on. In that capacity, I think many of us had experienced quite a significant change in the Ukrainian municipal administration. So we had much more self-confident and much more competent mayors, a local administration, but also capacity building there, which makes a huge difference from what we have seen before, that it has really emancipated from the Soviet heritage, but also it had developed quite an attractiveness for FDIs, for foreign direct investment, but also from domestic investors. So we have to make sure, on one hand, we have from our side, from the European side, but also from the other donor side, a good coordination and a good control mechanism in place. We need to make sure that this is also on the Ukrainian side, but also we have to make sure that it's not a centralized approach, and the civil society plays an active role in here. Plus what I've said before, when we look at this climate constraints, when we look at other constraints, that we do not go back to the moment from where the oligarchs had the, let's say, grip over all the major sectors like telecom, digital, energy, building, and so on. But we really have a more democratic approach. This at least is our thinking, and that is our intention when we speak about rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Yes, Márton?
Yeah, just a brief comment about the reconstruction. And Maria, in advance, please apologize for my cynicism. But when you talk about helping Ukraine from a Hungarian perspective, you have the first argument that, you know, it's the decent thing to do as a human, as a country, as a neighboring country being attacked, no questions asked. But then you go further, and then you can also argue that, okay, but you know, our allies, the NATO and EU members, all do it, and there are Hungarians, over 100,000 Hungarians who live in Ukraine, so of course that's what you should do. But if you put all of those aside, all of it, humane, logic, whatever, you still have the economic reason. One of the Polish banks had a document published a few months ago saying that the Polish economy can expect over $30 billion worth of projects from the reconstruction of Ukraine. So once again, it's a very cynical approach, but gives an extra layer to how insensible, how dumb it is what the Hungarian government represents currently in terms of the Ukrainian relationship.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to turn to the questions and answers. I would like to capitalize on that we have brilliant experts and diplomats in the room. We have just, about 10 minutes for Q&A, but anyone who would like to raise a question to any of our speakers at the panel are welcome. Okay, I see a hand over there and there.
Well, thank you.
Please introduce yourselves.
Thank you very much, Mark Higgy, Spectator Australia. My question is to Maria. Could I ask you about Ukraine's intermittent efforts to expel or at least to suspend Russia from the United Nations? You mentioned the Council of Europe. Of course, there are precedents for that. South Africa, during the apartheid era, was suspended from the United Nations in its last years. But in the case of Russia, it does look like a very formidable task. I mean, Russia and China are permanent members of the Security Council. So, but I'd just be interested in your perspectives on that and whether you think it is realistic in any sense.
Let me collect the other question as well. And Alexander.
Hi, hello. Alexander Stemp. I'm a sort of independent journalist, blogger. I have sort of two questions. First of all, it kind of struck me that one way to end this would be have a sort of Russian revolution, similar to Romania in 1989, where the army took the side of the people and they toppled Ceausescu. That sort of thing sort of came to my mind. I think that there are Russians who, who are anti the war, anti-Putin, hence all the kind of Russian refugees on neighbouring countries. So what chance would there be of some kind of Russian revolution? And the second question is, there's rumours that Viktor Orban's been invited to go to Kiev at some point. Is that going to happen anytime soon? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So first, Maria.
Yes, including the fact that we have 12 minutes, I'll try to be very, very brief. We are
11.
Yeah.
Not counting, but 11.
Thank you for a brilliant question, because this is the riddle of the century. How do we get rid of Russia, not only in the Security Council, but generally in the UN? And not many know that the document of Russia being accepted or re-accepted to the UN after the fall of the USSR, it's been never there, though they have inherited the seat of the USSR illegally, and hence they have inherited the Security Council seat. It was a decision done by the closed doors. That's why we know how, according to the statute, we can block the Russian delegation from the vote in the UN General Assembly. However, we're still keep it a small secret. How do we do it, if we may, with the UN Security Council, which Russia is going to be chairing again from the 1st of April, as you may know. Funny to say, it chaired it last February and in the months of during the months of invasion. And I would want to give you a figure. Russia has misused its veto power for 153 times, while the decisions were taken in favor of rather wars than preventing them and bringing the peace. Therefore, unless we do it, we will be still looking at this circus of absurd when the white is called black, etc. So we have a special working group on that with regards to UN thing, and we highly salute the fact that we still are capable in terms of diplomacy to collect, for instance, 141 vote in the recent event on the resolution supporting President Zelensky peace plan. With regards to Alexander's question on the Russian Revolution, I believed in it when Nemtsov was leading it, and he was a real opposition member who was shot dead in front of the Kremlin's door, and that's a direct evidence that Putin did take him serious. And you know, at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, I saw in the social media those videos from 2014 when Nemtsov was chairing the rallies in St. Petersburg, Moscow, smaller towns, when the millions on the streets were screaming Moskva za Kiev, Kiev za Moskvu, and it was taken as it's happening today. And we were, for one day, we were very happy that it's happening, but no one thought that it's 2014, so not today. And the Orban invitation, yes, indeed, it was extended in Brussels by President Zelensky, I believe so, and that's about Mr. Orban to accept it or not. The invitation has been extended. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
At this moment. Yeah, at this moment I have to put a disclaimer here. We invited a member of the parliament of the Fidesz group as well, but they could not participate in today's discussion referring to the evening vote. There will be on a very important issue, ratification on Finland's NATO membership. We fortunately have another member of the parliament here, and I can't claim that I can, speak in the name of the government, but Márton, what do you think about an upcoming possible Zelensky-Orban meeting?
Just briefly to the second question. I think what we need to see is that, yes, Russia has massive losses. Approximately 200,000 people dead or wounded on a level that they cannot be sent back on the front lines. True. But what they are running out of are equipment and officers, not men, and Rosguardia and those security forces which are responsible for the domestic peace barely suffered any casualties. So I don't see any revolution. From time to time, don't see any chance for a revolution. From time to time, you see social media posts about some small groups starting some insurgency for 2 days, and you don't hear them after that. So no, there is literally zero chance for that. But we don't know what's going up in the high ranks because it's the Kremlin. And regarding the Orban visit, I think it's very typical to talk about this in this particular building, because what we learned how the Fidesz operates was one of the milestones was the CEU case. The system measures everything up to the last word. And before they started to target CEU, they measured what is the least favorable way of saying CEU. The Migration University, Soros University, whatever. The worst outcome was for Soros University, thus they use Soros University for the campaign afterwards. They do the same with Ukraine. And what we saw is that when the president went to Ukraine, Ms. Novak, the backlash from their own supporters was insane. So considering that they do everything based on the measurements and how their own supporter base are brainwashed to think that, it's all the Ukrainian faults, the genocide in Ukraine, and so on and so on, I find it very unlikely. but with Orban, you never know. But at this point, I would give like 5% chance tops.
Just a very brief comment on that, because we were checking the trolling activity in Hungary on the Facebook, and what we found, for example, under the posts of the Hungarian president when she visited Ukraine, is that many of the committed Hungarians were in fact Russians who were just talking in the name of Hungarians, telling that it's a shame that you visit Ukraine. So I think, and it comes back to Viola's point, that Russia is still playing the game. I think there is a genuine demand for such kind of policies, but probably smaller than it sometimes seems in the quite distorted and distorted by Russia media landscape. Viola?
Yeah, well, quickly add to this. I mean, maybe you've heard Pristina and Belgrade had a so-called agreement last weekend, and also ahead of that, the Russian press and the Russian ambassador in Belgrade ran around and told everyone, no, Serbia is not in favor of signing, Serbia has no interest. While, I mean, Vučić could have had more, let's say, a commitment, but nevertheless he was in favor and he delivered much more than anyone expected, but it was not in the Russian interest. Coming back to the question of the Russian Revolution, is that very likely? I wouldn't exclude anything at the moment. I mean, all the taping the SBU does, so the Ukrainian Secret Service is very active, and you see the high level of frustration of the Russian inner circle of Putin, be it military, be it the oligarchs. I mean, they're fed up with the sanctions. They know that their political isolation does not pay off for their future. They will not send their kids to Chinese university, for sure not. So I think there will be a split. Whether this is enough for any kind of a disruptive development, we never know. I mean, if they really run out of high technology, ammunition, and so on, and it could be a significant defeat of some of the troops, and they could be encircled, there could be higher human cost than they are already. I think this would lead to a change in the leadership. I mean, we never know whether this is very close or not. We don't know, but I would not exclude anything at the moment. And so will this be a revolution? What I'm actually very much frustrated about is that more than 1.2 million people have left the country, either because they were conscripts or others, but none of them have really formed any kind of a political force outside of Russia. So you do not see really a political opposition which could be the one taking over after the Putin regime will fall. And that is something I fully in line with what you said about Nemtsov. I mean, he was one of the main political figures. Navalny now is in prison, and I mean his constitution is extremely bad. So whether there will be a different regime, for sure, better or worse, we will see. But after Stalin's death, it took them 5 years to finally find somebody else. Then they come up in '48 with Khrushchev. So we will see.
Thank you. So on this optimistic note, thank you for all of you for the participation. Thanks for Anton, thanks for Maria, thanks for Viola, and thanks for Márton. And thanks a lot for all of you who were following us either here on the spot or online, and see you at our upcoming events. Have a nice rest of your day.